Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to the Davis Parent University Lecture Series. Incredibly, we are now in our 16th year of bringing you nationally renowned authors and speakers. They present tips and tools for raising engaged, empathetic, ethical young people. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Being together, of course, to learn is really a hallmark of this community, and we're so glad that you're here. DPU would like to recognize the dignitaries who've joined us this evening, so please stand when I call your name. DJUSD Superintendent Matt Best. School Board Vice President Joe D'Annunzio. Davis High School Principal Dr. Bryce Geigel. And I'd also just like to give a big thank you to all of the educators and staff who are here joining tonight with us. We appreciate all that you do for our kids. Also a thank you to DPU's business and community sponsors, starting with Davis Media Access. They record all of DPU's lectures, including tonight's, so that people who can't be here in person can view the lectures on DPU's website at davisparentuniversity.com. And a special thank you to our Dean's List sponsor, Lori Prismich of Remax Gold, and to our other generous sponsors. And yes, please thank our sponsors. You know, sometimes I'm like, please hold your response to the end, but nobody listens, so I'm just gonna say clap when you want. Davis Joint Unified School District. Davis Schools Foundation. DJUSD PTAs and PTOs. St. James School. Eric Richardson, DJUSD Performing Arts Facilities Coordinator. Dr. Matthew Molitor Orthodontics, Chris Lawson of Aperture Alley Photography, Hyatt Place UC Davis, the UC Davis Campus Community Book Project, and everyone's favorite bookstore, the Avid Reader Bookstore of Davis. So here's how the evening's going to go. We're going to start with a 50-minute talk by our keynote speaker, followed by a 30-minute Q&A session, and then there's going to be a book signing in the front foyer, and then we'll close things down at 9 because mom and dad are tired. If you have a question during the lecture, feel free to jot it down on an index card. You should have been given an index card when you arrived. If you didn't get one, feel free to ask for one. DPU representatives will come by and pick up your question following the talk so that we can add it to the long list of questions that were pre-submitted. Tonight's keynote speaker is Ned Johnson, national best-selling author and president and founder of PrepMatters. PrepMatters is an education company providing academic tutoring and standardized test preparation. Ned is a recognized expert on test prep, stress regulation, and student performance. Importantly, he has helped students develop their own motivation to succeed. Along with Dr. William Stixrud, Ned is the co-author of the books The Self-Driven Child, The Science and Sense of Giving Your Kids More Control Over Their Lives, and the book, What Do You Say? How to Talk with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. Ned is the proud board member of College Tracks, which helps low-income students and first-gen college students, and the Safe Community Coalition, which promotes young people's health and safety. Ned's work has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Telegraph, and Wall Street Journal, among others. He also hosts the podcast, The Self-Driven Child. A graduate of Williams College, Ned has a degree in economics and political science. He's originally from Connecticut and now resides with his wife and kids in Washington, D.C. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to tonight's DPU keynote speaker, Ned Johnson.
Thank you so much. It is wonderful to be here. I'm going to set a little timer here because I don't always pay attention to time. My ADHD son, he didn't get it from his mom, so there's that. It's really great to be with you all. One of the things I'm going to talk about quite a bit tonight is how much people really benefit from and need people. Bill and I first started writing in early 2016. Our book came to print in 2018. We spent a lot of time talking with parents groups, and then there's this COVID thing you might have heard about. This was in the news for a while, and that made it a little dreary. I'm grateful for Zoom, but yeesh. And one of the last times we were in Palo Alto, we got a question from a parent who had been struggling with her daughter and attending to school, kindergartner, and getting work done and this kind of thing, and said, so last night my daughter drew a picture of mommy getting hit by a meteor. Should I be worried? We're like, you might want to back off a smidge. I'm just throwing that out there. So yeah, people need people, but on the other hand, Nietzsche said that hell is other people, so there's that. So the book that we're going to talk about tonight is called What Do You Say? How to Talk with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. And you're here because you love your kids the way that I love my kids. But you may have noticed that kids have brains and their thoughts of their own, and sometimes the well-intended message wisdom that you want to share, they're like, yeah, nah, right? Or perhaps in ways that are slightly less polite even than that. And so we find ourselves saying, I've told him a million times, why won't she listen to me? How do I get it through his head? And it's not fun for you, it's not fun for your kids either. And so we wrote this book just to make it easier for all of us to communicate a little bit more effectively, because there's few things are probably as stressful is seeing your kid struggle or wanting to help your kid, help in some way, and having a wah-wah, and then there's a, slamming of a door, and you're like, I was just trying to help. So this book, What Do You Say, really is an extension of the first book that we wrote called The Self-Driven Child. And the central thesis of The Self-Driven Child is this: it's incredibly important for young people to feel a greater sense of control about their lives than most of them currently do, both from a mental health perspective and from a motivational perspective. And I'll revisit these thoughts a little bit as I talk through tonight. But the Self-Driven Child, we sold almost 1 million copies worldwide. And people like the book. They love, there's a chapter in there that said, I love you too much to fight with about your homework. But then operationally, yeah, but what do I say in this moment because I said this and my kid said that, what should I say there? And so this is the purpose of this book. The lead idea in What Do You Say is the importance of connection. If you don't remember anything else from what I shared tonight, here it is. The single strongest protective factor against the effects of stress on developing young brains, and young brains by definition are developing, is a close connection that a child has with a parent or another caregiver. Full stop. Full stop. It's more significant to have a close connection than it is to be financially stable, than it is to live in a safe neighborhood, than it is to have educated parents. I mean, you're better off living in a friggin' war zone with a really nurturing parent than you are living in Shangri-La with a parent who feels like you're coming home and doing battle with them every day. And this isn't to give any of us a hard time, but with all the challenge that we so often see young people having, we wonder, what can we do, what can we do, what can we do? Knowing that you can't fix the world necessarily. But really the recipe for developing emotional resilience is adversity plus support. Right? And most of our children have enough adversity somehow, somewhere. And so the secret sauce to that is then for us to provide support. Now, curiously, there was a study that came out of CDC earlier this year that, let me see if I can get this right, 70% of parents felt that they were always providing support, always supportive of their children. The teens, 28%. And what I suspect this mostly means is that there's not a shared understanding of what it means to be supportive. Because I don't doubt that all of us, in our own way, are doing our very best for our kids. But we should probably talk about what it means to be supportive. So when we were writing What Do You Say, we talked with parents groups, we talked with school groups, we talked with teens, and this one conversation sort of starts this book where we're talking with, I don't know, it was 20, 30 kids from a local public high school. And Bill asked, my writing partner is a clinical neuropsychologist. He's actually now he has grandchildren. He actually, the other day, one of his grandkids said to him, Bill turns, his birthday's next week, and he said, "Grandpa, how old are you?" And he said, 74. And she goes, "Starting from 1?" So, between the two of us, we probably have about 65 years talking with teens. So we've learned a lot, and we'll hopefully share some of this tonight in the books. So anyway, we're talking to these teens, and Bill asked them, "Who do you feel closest to in the world?" And kids are raising their hand. "My mom, she's just the best. I mean, she's always there for me. My dad, he's so great, but sometimes it's my aunt, my uncle, it's my older sister, my grandpa, teacher, whatever." And so then Bill asked them, "What is it about them that makes you feel so close to them?" And we got two answers, really, of two flavors. One was, they just listen to me without judging me, which is hard to do. And two, they don't tell me what to do all the time, which is also hard to do, right? Because if you see your kid struggling, it's hard to button your lip and sit on your hands. We humans have something called the righting reflex. And the righting reflex is simply this: if your kid or your spouse, your friend, your mom, your dad, or whatever brings you a problem, your brain immediately goes into overdrive. Just think about this, right? Someone comes brings a problem to you, and you start thinking, well, you could do this, you could do this, you could do that, whatever. And you just start thinking of all these solutions to the problem. That makes sense. Or your kid's really upset, and you're trying to say, well, oh my gosh, sweetheart, it's only the first test, right? It's only the first game of the season. I'm sure you'll get a hit next time or whatever. And because when our kids are upset or our spouses are upset, we're trying to move them through those hard feelings, right? Has anybody ever done this? Okay. Like in the last 10 minutes? Okay, yeah, am I right? Here's the hard part. That feels like we're giving solutions, and we are. But to the person on the receiving end, it doesn't yet feel like support. That's a wonderful ringtone. I always have this, I feel like everyone has the same like ringtone. I'm walking through the airport today and the phone rings, and every time someone else's phone rings, I think it's mine. Does anyone do that? Anyway. So the challenge is this righting reflex. We have a natural inclination to try to solve problems. And that's wonderful. That's what you do as a caring human, it really is a mammal. The problem is, it's not the ideal first step. Because the person who's on the receiving end, and particularly a kid, feels like, well, Pam, if I only done one of these three things that just immediately popped to the top of my head, you wouldn't be in this pickle, you dope. Right? Or, oh my God, it's 8th grade, dude, seriously? You should not be this upset about it. Which basically says, you shouldn't be feeling the way that you feel. You've got this all turned around. And we've both done this to other people, and we've been on the receiving end of this. Here's what I suggest. Here's what the literature suggests we do instead. We just lean in with empathy and validation. And you've heard this before, but it's kind of hard to overstate how important this is. And empathy is just saying, wow, you're having a day, huh? And validation is, I get why you're having a day. I'd be mad about that too. And there are 3 big reasons why we want to do this. The first is that logic, solutions, here's how else you should think about it, don't calm hard feelings. It's when we feel that someone else is really working hard to understand how we feel about it, we feel like we're being listened to and understood, that calms hard feelings. It's also the case that we get closer to people when we share our hard feelings. And we share our hard feelings with people we're closer to. You can see how that goes both ways, right? And so if my wife or my kid brings me a problem and I immediately start going into whatever and telling them what they should be doing, they're like, why did I even bother? Right? And I've missed this opportunity to get closer to them. And it's hard to share hard feelings with people. But again, silver bullet, close connection, right? It's really worth it. And especially if you've got a kid who's struggling. And I will get into this. My kids have been a really great opportunity for me to try to walk the walk. When children or anyone bring a hard problem to us, and we don't jump into trying to fix it, and we're like, that sucks. I'm sorry. Whoever thought, by the way, that 15-year-olds would have nailed it on validation, like, bruh, that sucks, right? Like, and they're like, pretty much a mic drop on that, right? But when we do that, and we don't try to immediately move them out of that situation where they are, it's basically saying, it's okay if you're a mess. I'm okay with you when you're a mess. I can handle those hard feelings. And it's really a big deal. Probably the single most useful tool that you can use is something called reflective listening. It's kind of the core skill involved in psychotherapy, if you ever talked with a therapist, where they just kind of repeat back to you what you've heard. There's a wonderful guy named Ron McGann who coined the term, he calls it wigging, W-I-G, kind of what I got is. And you just repeat back to a kid what you think you heard. So let's think here. Your kid comes home from school and spun up, right? Oh my God, I did so bad on the test, and I studied like crazy. Mr. Johnson, he's just the worst. I can't believe it. After all that effort. And you're thinking, study? Huh. Well, I saw 8 hours watching the football games, and then you were playing on your phone the whole time. What's your definition of studying again, right? When things go splat for kids, this is hard. But when things go splat for kids, emotionally, we want to take their side on it. And we can emotionally take their side without agreeing on the facts. And here's what it looks like, the wigging. So what I hear is, you felt like you studied really hard on the test, and it really went terribly, and your teacher put things on there you didn't know were going to be there. Is that about right? Yeah. Note, I didn't say, your teacher did this. You feel like you studied really hard for that, and you thought that the teacher put things on there, right? I'd be mad too if I felt like I'd studied really hard and it didn't go well. I don't have to agree with the facts, but I can validate the kid's perspective on it. And when we do this, and when kids feel like we're trying hard to understand their perspective, a kid is much more likely to be open and say, maybe I could have studied a little bit more, right? We're back to Palo Alto, we keep spending time out there. We give this lecture, and we come home, we come back to our hotel, and we get an email from this mom who had listened to Bill and me lecture. She comes home to find her 7th grader just in tears. Mom, I'm the weakest boy in all of 7th grade, and everybody's big and strong, and I just don't know what to do. And she said, normally, I mean, it's like, right? It's like she's ready to go to bed, and this is like, it's a lot. And she said, normally I would have said, sweetheart, that can't possibly be true. I mean, there are all kinds of other kids who aren't big or strong yet, or you're so good at robotics, like that matters, right? Or like, think how good you are at math. I'm like, oh my God, right? Or well, everybody else in our family is a late bloomer, so you're pretty much doomed. I mean, whatever, right? You can imagine the things that sort of fall out of our mouths. And she said, I didn't do this. And I just said, man, so everyone else is getting strong and you're not there yet? That's hard. Sure is, and everybody, and they're so mean at me on the playground, I can't do it. And she just repeats back to him what he says. Now, by the way, if you do this and your kid's like, why are you repeating back to me, right? You just say, I just want to make sure that I understand your perspective. That's all this. I just want to make sure I understand this. And so the boy dries his eyes, gives his mom a hug and goes to bed. She's like, geez, what a day, right? Comes down to breakfast the next day, and her son has a plan, a written plan. If you have a 7th grade boy, that's a big deal, right? A plan on how he thinks he can get stronger and enlists his mom's help. This is the ideal. This is the ideal. As parents, and we'll talk more about this, as parents we have a tendency to want to, when we hear hard things, we want to try to solve things for our kids, right? Because we don't want them to be unhappy. We don't want them to struggle. We don't. But the problem is, when we start trying to offer advice, a lot of times they bat it away, can feel invalidated, and importantly, we're deprived children of the opportunity to feel like the source of the solution was within them rather than outside of them. And so if you haven't read The Self-Driven Child yet, it's worth reading. So in this book, we then kind of revisit some of the suggestions that we make. And the first one is this. The second chapter of The Self-Driven Child has the title, I Love You Too Much to Fight With You About Your Homework. And it advocates that we as parents and educators try to take a position of sort of being a consultant rather than the boss or the manager or the homework police. Because it's a really bad position for us to be in, principally because if your kid flat out refused to do his homework, what exactly are you going to do? You're going to duct tape him to a chair? You're going to like Clockwork Orange him? That's an older reference. I mean, what are you going to do, right? And typically what happens is we use so much energy that the kid finally gives into it. And what we suggest, we turn the energy around. There are three implications of being a consultant, all under the heading of our job as parents is to help our kids be ready to run their own lives. Full stop, right? In a perfect world, nothing terrible ever happens to any of us, right? You're there all the way through like great-grandchildren, right? But I could fly home and just the plane crash, and that's the end of Katie and Matthew's dad. And if they can't carry on life without me, I probably haven't done my job. My kids are both in college. I probably haven't done my job that well. So even at the youngest possible age, we want to try to foster in kids the sense of their own ability. One, because it's vital to intrinsic motivation. We'll talk about that. And two, stress is, if you feel helpless, hopeless, powerless, I need someone else to save me, of course kids are going to be anxious. So here's what we suggest as being a parent consultant. You offer help, you offer advice. You let kids make decisions as much as they possibly can, unless they're just crazy. Meaning like 19 out of 20 people would say, that's the worst idea I've ever heard, right? And three, and this is really important, you let kids fix their own mistakes when they can. So, offer help and offer advice. The language of this looks like, hey, I got a thought on that. Can I run that by you? Even just asking, I got a thought on that, can I run it by you? Because it confers a certain measure of control, they can take it or leave it. It brings down the defensiveness that we so often see in people. Of course, if they say no, then you ram it down their throat. No, geez, you don't do that. But it makes kids, a low sense of control is the most stressful thing that we can experience. So when we feel like other people are trying to control us, by definition, we get amped up, and it's really hard for us to learn and to hear what other people are saying. So you just offer it. And if they say no, say, okay, well, if you change your mind, let me know. It's respectful. And anything else is simply not effective. If you ram it down the throat, they go, oh, okay, sure, yeah, that's great, okay, great, which means I'll say anything to get you to stop talking at me, right? The second thing is we want to let kids make their own decisions. Apart from telling a kid, like, I'm just crazy about you, one of the most helpful things we can do to teens is to say, I have confidence in your ability to make good decisions. I do. And will they all be right? No. You're human, at least I think so, right? And we want kids to have tons of experience making decisions while they're home under our roof before they go off to college with hopes, dreams, and suitcases full of our money, right? And you don't learn to make good decisions without the experience making decisions. And the last thing is we want to give kids every opportunity to solve problems when they make mistakes. Because otherwise, they will think that they're the problem creator and somebody else is the problem solver. And that's a really disabling message to internalize. And it leads to kids then being afraid to, how many people know children who are perfectionistic, right? They're terrified of making a mistake because what would happen if they do that? If you blow it with your friend, you say something stupid, you embarrass yourself in some way, but you figure out some way to sort of right that wrong, oh my goodness, you're much more courageous going forth in the world saying, I can try hard things, and I don't have very many skills. I'm really good at apologizing, lots of experience. So I just don't worry that much that I'll screw things up because it's just what my experience has been. I will tell you, by the way, when The Self-Driven Child first came out, Bill got a postcard from a mom who had said to her 8th grade son, I love you too much to fight with about your homework. And she looked at him and she said, and first he smiled, and then he hugged me and he said, "Is something wrong with you, Mom?" One of the language of this idea of a paraconsultant is that we talk about the power of no force, where you say to a kid, "Listen, I couldn't possibly make you do your homework. What am I going to do? I'm going to duct tape you to a chair? How can I make you do this?" And when you just take force completely off the table, it really has a profound impact. There's a story in our book. Bill was working. A kid who had been diagnosed in second grade with ADHD and had refused to take medication for 6 years. Everybody, the pediatrician had to come to Jesus meetings with him, so you got to take this stuff, because he was just all over the place. And he's like, "Over my dead body." So the parents reached out to Bill and said, "Will you talk him into taking these medications?" Bill said, I don't believe in talking people into things. I'll talk with them about it." So the kid comes in, and Bill says, "Listen, first, nobody makes you take medicine that you don't want to take. This is your body. This is your brain. And if they make you take it, let me show you how." And he showed him how to hide the pill under his tongue, right? And then he showed him, if you swallow, he showed him how to make himself throw up, right? So they couldn't possibly make you do this. But then he said, "But respectfully, as a neuropsychologist, I understand that ADHD is rooted in a relative deficit of dopamine. And for some kids, when they take stimulant medication, it's life-changing. Everything is easier. It's like first time they put on glasses, and you're like, trees have leaves. Who knew, right? But for some kids, it doesn't help very much. Don't bother, right? Or the side effects are lousy. It's not worth it. And there's no way to know. I can't tell you that it'll help. I can't tell you that it won't help. The only one who can tell that is you. You're the expert on you. So if for me, I try it for a couple weeks and see what you think. If it helps you, keep taking it. If it doesn't, don't." And the kid had been fighting for 6 years. And he went out to the waiting room and said, "Okay, I'll try it." And he was luckily one of those kids where it made a really big difference. And so if you feel like you've been fighting over and over and over and over, you just say to, "Look, I couldn't make you do this, but I'd like to give you my best argument for why I'd like you to try it, and try it as an experiment." A lot of kids, if you cast things as experiments, a lot of times people will be open to things because they feel that if I start doing this now, if I say yes, I'm stuck doing this forever. So I do all this test prep, and I have this kid, I adore her, but her parents are so anxious. And their motivational style is, I'm going to call it suboptimal, in that saying things like, if you don't get your grades up, you're going to work at McDonald's for the rest of your life. You're going to end up homeless. Now, I worked at McDonald's for 2 years in high school. I'm not homeless, so I'm feeling like I'm having a hard time buying this. But she's really anxious. So I'm trying to help her with test anxiety, and we're doing this through the vehicle of standardized tests. So there's an ACT last Saturday. So I'm off giving another talk in another corner of the world, and I get this text from her at 8:30 at night on Friday. "I just can't do this." Okay. "Do you want me to call?" Text her back. "Yes, please." So I get on the phone, and I said, so tell me. And she's like, I have to sit, it's extra time. I'll be there 6 hours. I can't. Now, I wanted to tell her, wait a second, there are all these breaks, it won't be 6 hours at punch, but those reasons don't matter. So I said, well, can I give you a thought on this? Okay, sure. Have your mom drive you to the test, walk in the front door, immediately walk out the back of the high school. Sit there, play on your phone, wait for mom to pick you up, and go home. Who will know the difference? She's like, what? Or, I don't know, go and do the English section, first section of the test. And it feels like that's okay. I don't know, maybe try the second section, right? Or if you get through the first section, like, that was the first, I just can't do it more. There's a Whole Foods just down the block from where the school is. Again, walk out the back door, go down there, bring your credit card, buy an entire box of cinnamon rolls. Eat said cinnamon rolls, wait until 1 o'clock, go back out the front door and say, Mom, the test was delicious, delightful, it went great, right? And I'm, of course, being super silly with her. But because she didn't feel like she was going to be forced to do this, and her parents have spent all this money, and you can imagine, well, after all the time and money, blah, blah. And when I took force off the table, she's like, okay, I could do it. Because a low sense of control is so stressful. And when people are stressed, they become incredibly inflexible in their thinking. So this power of no force is a really powerful thing. One of the parts that's hard about this is that naturally, if we're kind of giving more control to teens, which we should, it means less control for us. And a low sense of control is hard for us as well, especially if you have a kid where things aren't going well. And you think, if only they would do this, they'd be a better outcome. And I know how hard this is. The chapter we introduce in The Self-Driven Child in this book, What Do You Say? We talk about the idea of being a non-anxious presence. I wish we'd made this term up. We borrowed it from a guy who was a consultant, who's a rabbi, worked with schools and corporations, and he simply made the observation that things work better when the person or people who are in charge, they're not overly emotional, they're not overly reactive, because stress is incredibly contagious, incredibly contagious. And is there anyone in the audience who either has a child or knows a child or is this person or knows someone who is anxious? Does anybody know anyone who's anxious? You might have heard about them, sort of been in the news. Anyone see the movie The Sixth Sense? Do you remember this movie? I see dead people. I made this little meme of this, and where Haley Joel Osment is talking to Bruce Willis and he says, I see stressed people. They're walking around like normal people. They don't know that they're stressed. I feel like they all talk to me. You've read the statistics. I mean, the statistics on teen mental health and anxiety, I mean, it's off the charts. It's off the charts. And it's off the charts everywhere, not just in Davis, California, or Palo Alto, California, but Dallas, Texas, and Chicago, and DC, everywhere you look. So it's an interesting question about why that is. But it also means that it can't be your fault or my fault, because if this is pervasive, well, let's think about why this might be and what we can do about it, both collectively and individually. One of the things that we've observed is over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a huge uptick on the way that we are told to survey our kids, to know where they are down to the meter all the time, to know where their GPA is to the 0.1 or whatever. Did anyone grow up knowing what your parents know when you grade to the decimal? Right? And I understand the inclination behind this because it's like, I need to make sure that my kids are safe. I get it. Here's the thought experiment in my head. How do we use language or take action that helps children be safe without, at the same time, giving them messages of, you should be afraid if your grades aren't good enough, of this person, because the world out there is so scary, I need to make sure that whatever. You're not strong enough to handle it. The world is too scary. You see where I'm coming from that? And this is, in some ways, it's just kind of a collective psychosis that we're all have all fallen under. Here's the good news. As much as stress is contagious, so is calm. So is calm. When we were writing this, we realized or learned that calm is contagious is a mantra of the Navy SEALs. I don't know, I think of these as high-performing individuals with jobs that are slightly more stressful than the average job, right? So my advice for us as parents, a few things. One is really to take the long view. If your kid is struggling now, you get anxious. And it's not really anxious about this birthday party that they didn't get invited to, or they didn't make the soccer team, or they bombed a math test or whatever. It's really about the future. Back to that kid I was telling his parents, like, how's she ever going to make it in the real world? Well, if we have a sense that she'll never make it in the real world, it's hard for her to have confidence to move forward and do the things to build her life, right? So I will pick on my own children for a little bit. My daughter, who is now in her second year of college, was full school refusal for the last 3 months of 8th grade. Okay, I'm a guy who helps people get into college, kind of what's going through my head, oh my God, you're a parenting expert? Oh my. And everything was hard. It took a long while for us to figure what was going on. But I went out for a walk with her, and just she had had friends for 2 years, school was a mess, just everything was hard. And I said to her, listen, you are so creative, and you're smart as a tack. You're absolutely vicious at board games. I haven't won since you were in 4th grade. You're going to have really cool friends, and you're going to contribute to this world in really great ways. Sure doesn't feel that way. I know. Everything sucks right now. I get it. But it's easier for children to be confident about their future and okay with things that are hard now if we don't go to pieces about this as well. And my experience perhaps made it a little bit easier for me to have some confidence this way. I had a complicated childhood. My dad was an alcoholic, and my mom was in and out of institutions, and I spent 3 months of 7th grade in a pediatric psychiatric hospital. It's what I needed at that time, and my parents did the best that they could. And I'm sure there are other folks who have stories that are, experiences that are just as hard, if not harder. Ideally, I don't present like a guy who spent 3 months in a pediatric. If I do, just say no. Just please, just keep on going. But it's easier for kids don't tend to get stuck. They don't tend to get stuck because they want their lives to work out. And it's a lot easier for them to do that if they're not scared all the time. And it's easier for them to not be scared all the time if we're not scared all the time. And so the more confident we can just say, this is just part of their path. It's just part of their path. This is a source of, future resilience. It is what it is, right? So to take the long view as much as you can, to also, and this is sometimes hard, but really just try to enjoy your kid for as they are. We oftentimes feel like if our kids are sucking at school or whatever, right, behavioral issues, that we feel like we need to put all of our energy into things that are hard, and we need to fix that, and then things will be all right. But rarely do we kind of fix the problem and then make kids feel better. More often when we help kids feel better, then the problem fixes itself. Or the kids fix the problem, because that emotional dysregulation, it's just, you can't kind of do anything. So the last thing I'll say on this is, as much as you can, it's really helpful for us to take seriously what do we do as parents to bring stress out of our nervous system. If you think about, starting with COVID, right? Think about, if this hasn't been the last of those 2 years weren't the hardest 2 years in the history of parenting, I don't know when they would have been. Because it wasn't just this community or that community, it was the whole darn world. And again, stress is really contagious. And the way that I think about this is that the inflows of stress into a nervous system, a family system, a school system, a community, aren't balanced by healthy outflows of stress, all kinds of bad things will happen. So, when my son started college during 2020, which is an interesting time to do anything, of course, and then the summer after his first year of college, he acquired a brain tumor. He's great now, but holy smokes! Like COVID isn't bad enough, and what's that line that people say? I know the good Lord only gives you what you can handle. But gosh, I wish you didn't have so much confidence in you. Oh my goodness. So, we got the right team, we got the right care, but my wife and I were out for dinner probably about 3 weeks into this adventure. And she said, I've had like 3 or 4 people ask me, how are you so calm about this? And she said, honestly, I think it's the meditation, and this isn't fully a plug for, Bill and I practice my wife, something called transcendental meditation, which is simply, and there are many things that people can do, but it's a practice to try to consistently pull stress out of our nervous system. My wife is from this lovely family, they're terrific folks, Midwestern, but they're not exactly non-anxious. What's the word I'm looking for? Neurotic. That's the word I'm looking for. They're neurotic to the bone, right? And so she's not wired in a way to be non-anxious. But over time, she's gotten to be there. And so it's something I really encourage you to take seriously, everything from sleep to spending time with friends to whatever practices you have, because when kids are having a hard time, it's not intuitive to think that one of the most helpful things that we can do is just to be less anxious ourselves. There's a study that was done in the UK that asked kids what do they most want from their parents, and the number one was they just wanted their parents to be happier. Because when their parents were happier, it's just easier to be with them, right? So let me talk about a few more things. We talk about motivation a lot. And our North Star is something called self-determination theory. In motivation, there are kind of two flavors of motivation. There's extrinsic, so carrots and sticks, right? Give me your phone kind of thing. Get those grades up. And then intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation is where people want to work hard. They want to get better. And if we think about school especially, if we're honest about it, it's not so much that we want our kids to do well or to work hard. It's that in a perfect world, we want them to want to work hard, right? Because you can work hard under duress, right? If you don't do this, I'm going to shoot your dog kind of thing, right? But we want kids to really want to feel that I get out of this life what I put into it. And we want them to work hard, at their friendships and athletics and music and art and school and everything that matters to them. So here's the deal. The model for intrinsic motivation, it's called self-determination theory. It's super elegant. It says there are three needs that need to be met: a sense of competency, a sense of relatedness, and a sense of autonomy. So I've just talked quite a bit about what the language of autonomy looks like, and relatedness we've talked about as well. And competency is oftentimes just saying to kids, you're good enough at this. You're good enough. Kids often feel like, I have to be the best. Respectfully, nobody's the best. If you're 1 in a million, there's 6,000 people or 8,000 people in the world who are precisely like you. If you do the math, there are 8 billion people, exactly like me. You're giving this talk right now, like, what? And so that's kind of a hard place to be. But Bill works a lot, particularly if you've got kids for whom school is not easy. Bill, do people know the work of Carol Dweck? Okay, so the growth mindset. So we really like her work. We quibble a little bit. One thing that she says is never tell kids that they're smart. And respectfully, we see it a little bit differently because there's some kids who never feel like they're smart. They feel like they're stupid, they can never compete. And Bill's language on this is, you're smart enough. You're smart enough to contribute in this world. You're smart enough to do the kind of things that you want, right? And again, competency doesn't mean I'm the best, it just means that I'm good enough, I'm capable enough, I'm smart enough. The other couple things on motivation are, people know the flow experience. Do you know of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi? Oftentimes we live in spaces where we feel like we have to put all of our energy into kids' academic performance. And what we care most about is healthy brain development. I'm in DC, I'm an overpriced test prep tutor. I work with kids who are pretty honest, right? Kids who are a little tightly wound. And I was working with this girl. Gosh, I just adore this kid. And she came into me. I could sense a lot of things weren't quite right, and I sent her off to Bill's group, and she got tested. Unsurprisingly, undiagnosed ADHD, not surprised. Undiagnosed anxiety, not surprised. Undiagnosed depression, not surprised. Undiagnosed dyslexia, I was surprised by that. How do you get to be 17 years old in a junior in high school and this hadn't been attended to? And she was in an independent school. So she's my current favorite kid because she's just the best. And I asked her at one point, I said, what do you understand is the most important outcome of high school and adolescence? Well, getting good enough grades and getting to a really good college. What? I'm sorry, wrong answer. What? I said, we've talked about this. You're really sharp, but you're anxious and you're depressed and you're ADHD. The most important outcome of high school and adolescence is the brain that you carry into adulthood. I'd like for you to be a little less anxious. I'd like you to be a little more happy. In some ways, I could give a fig about your ACT score. You shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say what? That you don't care about my score. You're a test prep tutor. Well, here's the great part. So, spending time with your friends, a good thing, makes you happy. Getting more sleep makes parents less annoying, and children less annoying too, makes you happy. I said, everything that's good for your health and happiness It's actually good for test scores. I can't lose. She was mad. But one of the things with how kids spend their time, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and Mihai had the idea of flow experience, and we often feel like that the kids are going to develop themselves most in the brains in what they do academically. And there's a really good researcher named Reed Larson who said that that adolescents develop themselves not by dutifully doing their homework, by what he described as the passionate pursuit of pastimes. And so so long as you've got a kid who's working hard to get better at something, whether it's coding or it's rock climbing or it's music or it's art, we don't have to worry about that kid because he's doing the hard work or she's doing the hard work of high effort, high focus, high intention, and it's developing brains that when they find an academic pursuit, they can really turn it on. One quick point that I wanted to share, when we wrote this book, What Do You Say, a lot of it is really, again, building on themes from the self-driven child. But there was one thing that we hadn't really wrapped our heads around, and it was this. A lot of times when people are asking, how do I motivate my kid? What they're really saying is, how do I change him? Particularly if they're doing things or in a place that we don't approve of. Here's the hard part. We don't change people against their will, right? You can't change people who aren't asking to change, but there's a lot that we can do. And so I'll talk about two ideas. There's something called motivational interviewing, and this was created by a couple psychologists in the 80s who were working with problem drinkers. So if, I'm really hitting the bottle, and as my friend would say, Ned, man, you really got to knock it off. It's so bad for your health, and Vanessa's going to leave you, and my goodness, you work with kids. You can't be rolling in like that, whatever. And what I'll deny it, and I'll fight, say, you don't understand. I've got this under control. I can totally handle this. And I'll fight the very people who are trying to help me. You can imagine the scenario, right? Here are the insights of motivational interviewing. If we go back to that wigging, the what I got is, the people when they're in that position, they're ambivalent, right? So a kid who's got really lousy grades, it's not lost on him that if he worked harder, his mom would be more proud, his teachers would be more respectful, his friends would stop giving him a hard time, he'd feel better about himself. But on the flip side, maybe he doesn't like Mr. Johnson as a teacher. That guy's kind of a jerk, right? Or maybe he thinks I'll never compete with my older sister. Or maybe he'd rather be playing Xbox like it's his job, right? Or maybe he knows if I've tried to work really hard in the past and it hasn't worked out that well. And I could go full out and work as hard as I possibly can and go from grades that are sucky to sucky plus. And actually learn the limits of my intellectual abilities. That is a scary thing to do. So what happens is when children, problem drinkers, kids who are underperforming in school, there's an ambivalence. They want to do better. They also want to throw the whole thing out the window. And what happens is when we argue one side of the equation, you've done this, you've experienced this in your life with somebody. You argue one side, they say, yeah, but. Okay, but you don't understand. And they just keep arguing the other side. And they dig themselves deeper into all the reasons why they couldn't possibly do this thing. Has anyone ever seen this happen? Right? So here's what you do. The chapter, by the way, is called The Language and Silence of Change. What motivational interviewing does, and there's a whole practice for it, but there are tools from this that we can borrow. And so what we do is we ask open-ended questions. We use reflective listening where we repeat back to folks what we think we've heard, and then we wait for a change talk. With the idea that if I'm a kid who's ambivalent, a person who's ambivalent, it's way more powerful for me to argue, even in a tentative way, the reasons why I want to go on the kind of light side of things, rather than someone else argue the other side for me. Does that make sense? Because then it becomes sort of, toxic, and people don't want to have to eat a whole plate of crow to go along with, changing their mind on things. So the story that's in the book, we have a friend who's a really good school therapist, school counselor, and she caught wind of a girl who was smoking a lot of weed. And so she rolled up to her and said, I wonder if we could talk about this. First thing she did was take Forrest off the table. You're a smart kid. I'm not going to try to talk you out of smoking weed. Not going to do it. However, I'd love to understand your perspective on it. Tell me a little bit about kind of what do you get out of it? And the girl sort of waxes rhapsodic about, how she feels so much more relaxed. She feels funny. The girls she hangs out with, they're really cool, and that's kind of cool, and they're funny, and blah, blah, blah. And our friend repeats this all back. And they go back and forth at this a few times. And then the girl says, let's slip something like, It's kind of expensive, though. Oh, tell me more about that. That'd be the place that's easy to pounce. We want to not do that. Well, tell me more about that. Well, I buy a couple times a week, and it uses pretty much all the money that I've got. Oh, that makes sense. Open-ended question. If you had more money, like, I don't know, what would you do with it? Well, maybe I'd buy a cute pair of red shoes, or I'd get my nails done, or something like this. Well, that makes sense. So she thanks the girl for being so open, and they go their separate ways. And she sees her a week or so later, and she has her nails done. So she sidles up to her, and she said, well, those are cute. Tell me about that. Oh, yeah, no, I decided last week I only bought once, and I got my nails done. Did you like them? It looks really good on you. I like that color. By the end of the semester, the girl had stopped smoking weed because she wanted to. She was a smart kid, and she wanted to be academic, and she really recognized that these girls that she was smoking with weren't really interested in moving in the direction that she wanted to be moving in. Now, it's obviously easier for someone to have this conversation when it's not your kid who's smoking weed. I get that. But we were in the middle of writing this, and Bill had a client who reached out with a similar situation. Bill sent this chapter over to her, and she did just this and asked her 16-year-old son kind of about his experience with it. And the change talk was, but I can't run as hard as I want to, and I really want to be on varsity this year for basketball. And when people can articulate their own reason for wanting to make change, it's way more powerful than when we sort of lay things on folks. The other part of this chapter, again, anyone have an anxious person in their lives? Anyone? All of us, right? Has anyone heard of the space program? Not like let's go send people to Mars, but Ellie Leibovitz in space? Okay, so this is really interesting. So he is at Yale, and he created a program called Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions. And the idea was this, that when we have a kid who's anxious, it doesn't stay a kid problem very long. It pretty quickly becomes a family systems problem, right? So if your kid is anxious and is terrified to fly in planes, okay, we'll just take car trips everywhere, right? Or super perfectionistic, and you'll check their paper again and again and again. The observation, though, was that when we make accommodations, we either protect kids from the thing that they find anxiety making, or we reassure them over and over and tell them, it's sweetheart, it'll be fine, I'll be fine, I'll be fine, I'll be fine, thinking that it'll make them less anxious. Over time, it actually makes people more anxious for two reasons. One is they never confront the thing that makes them anxious and have an experience where they realize that they can handle it. Right? Most anxiety is not about the thing, but the hard feelings that people want to avoid. They want to avoid the anxiety about the thing, not just the experience. And when they have the belief that they can't tolerate those hard feelings, it gets worse and gets worse. And when we protect kids, when we make these accommodations, we're saying to them, you are right to be as afraid about this thing as you are. So my favorite story, I actually got to interview Dr. Leibovitz for a podcast. There's this little girl, and she's terrified that bad people are going to break into her house. And so they check the front door, they check the back door, they check the windows, they check the basement, they go up to the attic, but maybe they came in the basement, where in the attic? They go back to the basement, they go round and around and around and around, and it's exhausting. And at some point, the dad just loses it, and he goes to Home Depot and buys the world's biggest lock that you can get and puts it on the front door and says, see, there, we're finally safe. And the girl immediately turns to her mom and says, see, I told you there are bad people out there. That's why Dad bought the bigger lock. And so what we do with this is we stop making accommodations. And there's a whole protocol. The book, it's called Breaking Free of Childhood OCD and Anxiety and OCD. It's really good. And there's a process to this. But we make supportive statements where instead of saying, oh my gosh, it's no big deal, which is invalidating, everybody else in 7th grade can handle this, it's invalidating, right? Or, I'll keep soothing, I'll protect you, saying that you're right to be anxious about this. What we do with the supportive statements is say, I get that you get really anxious sitting there at the school bus by yourself. I understand, it's kind of weird sitting there by yourself. And I used to think that you weren't strong enough to handle it. But I was wrong. I mean, you're in whatever grade you're in now. I know you can handle it. I know it's going to make you a little nervous. So I'm not trying to talk the kid out of the hard feeling, but I'm also saying I have complete confidence in you that you can handle this. You then actually invoke processes of nonviolent resistance, and you kind of weather the storm for this. With the last talk that I was given, this was crazy. I was driving in Massachusetts, and the school bus was coming by. And there were kids who looked like they're 5th, 6th, 7th grade, and there were 3 adults with them, waiting for the bus to show up. If anyone's doing this, I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but still. And then the bus stops here, and then about this far down the road, there's another gaggle of kids with 3 more parents, and I'm like, and so unintentionally what they were saying to these kids is that the world's so scary that you couldn't walk 20 yards unaccompanied to join with other kids. And we're back to this drip feed message of telling kids to be afraid. Does that make sense? So if you have a kid who's anxious, this program, by the way, the reason we included this is that there are kids who are super anxious who reject therapy. They won't engage with it. What's called cognitive behavioral therapy, where we use methods to try to get kids to confront their fears. This process that only works with parents, it's me as a parent changing my dance steps. It asks nothing of my son or daughter. This method is as effective in treating childhood and teen anxiety as if the kid, him or herself, has done a full round of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's really powerful because what it's basically saying, you're allowed to be upset. You're allowed to be fearful of that. But I'm not. But I'm not. And when they constantly see the adults around them saying, yeah, it makes sense that you're allowed to be upset about that, but I'm not. It's giving this counter message that the thing that they're afraid of, they don't have to be afraid of them because mom and dad know that it's actually okay. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is happiness. Seems like a good idea, why not? We were lecturing in Dallas, Texas. How much, on a scale of 1 to 10, where's the academic pressure in Davis these days? Okay. So 1 is over here. Is anybody at 1? Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11. Ours goes to 11. 13. So we were in Dallas, Texas, and there was a bunch of student government leaders, whatever, and Bill asked them, how many of you want to be happy as adults? And they're like, is it a trick question or something, right? And he says, well, what do you understand is necessary to be happy as an adult? And this kid raised his hand and says, well, we understand that if you get into a good enough college, well, then everything else falls into place. And Bill's looking for the nearest wall, bang his head on, and thinking, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So I'm back from the East Coast. Have people ever heard of Yale? You've heard of this university, Yale? Okay, right. Do people know Laurie Santos? Do you know that name? So Laurie Santos, she's a professor of psychology, and she was also a dorm monitor, professor who lived there. And she's looking at all these young people, and they are miserably unhappy. Miserably unhappy. And thinking, these are among the most accomplished children on the planet. And if getting into a good college, if that was it, what's going on here? So she designed a class on happiness, a course on happiness. Within a year, the most popular class in the history of Yale, and thinking, we have to teach bright young people how to be happy? That seems odd, right? Kind of odd. They're good at test scores. Why can't they understand happiness, right? So there's a guy named Martin Seligman who founded something called positive psychology. And the first 100 years of psychology were basically looking at, all the ways that people can really suffer and struggle, and how do we help them suffer less. And he said, why don't we turn this around? Why don't we look at people who are really thriving? And what's that guy doing? What's she doing? Why are they so darn happy? And so the thing is called PERMA. So it's just a beautiful acronym. So P is positive emotions. Is Josh here, by the way? Did Josh make it? I met this guy on a plane who was 13 years. He's an educator. He was in the Army. He was fantastic, great. And he had this question. And he said, I'm checking my time really quickly. Oh, yeah, I've screwed it up. I'll talk really fast. Oh, well. And And he said, and he's done all this training with young people, and he said, think about the things that make you happy. And then he says, think about the things that if you lost, it would make you miserable. Are they the same things? Right? And so most of us really, what we think will make us happy isn't fully what will make us happy. So PERMA says it's positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. So positive emotions, some of it, people are wired to be more glass half full, get more sleep, more gratitude practices, meditation, da-da-da. E is engagement, that flow experience of being deeply engaged in things that are just fun for you. R is relationships. There was a longitudinal study that's been going since the 1930s out of Harvard, and they can, everything in the world, they followed these college graduates until they died and their families on and on. The single most significant thing for their happiness was the relationships, full stop. M is meaning, religiosity, military service, environmental justice, whatever, like there's something that's larger than me. And then A is accomplishment, and that's not insignificant, getting into the college of your dreams, winning awards, financial wealth, all of it. But it's 1/5 of the equation. And so our perspective on this is that we would do well as adults to really model to our kids the things that make us happy. Like my wife plays in a semi-professional orchestra, and Art, her orchestra spouse, as she describes, which I think is a great term, right? And one of their goals is they want to keep playing this until they're both 80, right? And that's a really valuable relationship for them. Bill was telling me the other day about a young woman he's working with, super academic. And there's a question on this inventory. He said, how are a friend and an enemy alike? And she said, they're both competition. Right? When we know that, relationships are arguably the most valuable, the most important thing that we can have. So I encourage all of you to reflect on things that you know that make you happy and to model that for children, because and in some ways it's almost like it's you have to be it's not enough to not be racist, you have to be an anti-racist, the Ibram X. Kendi thing, right? You can be putting zero pressure on your child, zero, and they're already succumbing to the pressure that's out there in the world. So what we in many ways have to do is kind of counter programming. And listen, I want your children to be as academically successful as they can, because it's good for them to work hard. It's good for your families, it's good for your school, it's good for the community. We want to develop talent everywhere that we can, but we want to do this in a way that's balanced, right? And we don't see academic achievement as the only thing that matters. Okay, last point, I'm looking at the time because I know we have 1,000 questions. Children forget most of what you tell them. They'll forget most of all those times you showed up with their soccer cleats or their term paper. They'll forget that stuff too. But what they remember, what gets wired into brains, is how we make them feel. And I started with saying that the single most powerful protective factor against the effects of stress, and there's too much in our world right now for young people, is the close connection that your child has with you, or with you, or with you, or with you. And I want your children, the same thing I want for my children, is that they feel loved and they feel supported, not pushed, and then they feel that we trust them and that they're capable. And we really just want to take this work seriously, because we have one chance to really develop young minds. And they're going to move through school, and they're going to move out of your household and out into the world. And they will carry with them all the ways that you make them feel, good or bad. And so we often wonder, what do we do with all the anxiety in the world? And if you just know that you hold to that the close connection they have with you, it's emotional Teflon. It's really powerful stuff. And you don't have to be an expert at anything to really work hard and put in that relationship first and foremost. Thank you for making time to join me tonight. I'm supposed to sit here, right? Okay. I stole your mic.
You have the hand mic from the podium.
Which one do you want? Give that to you? Sure.
Thank you so much. Can we get another hand for Ned? I know that folks are super interested in what you've talked about, because we have about 1,001 questions. Ned's going to take a breather, and I'd like to invite you to hand your index cards with any questions that you might have to any of the DPU reps in the black t-shirts so that we can have more than 1,001. And at this time, I'd like to introduce the chair of DPU, Abby Koenig.
Thank you, Pam. And thanks a million, Ned. Thank you for all of your, see you behind Pam. Thank you for all of your practical guidance and language and concrete tips. Super helpful in this super messy work of raising kids. So thank you. And thank you to all of you for being here tonight and taking time out of your busy schedules. As many of you have heard me say before, DPU would not exist without a community of parents and caregivers and educators committed to learning together. So thank you for being here. As many of you have also heard me say in the past, DPU would not exist as well without money. So if you feel like you acquired some new skills or some new helpful language, we would greatly appreciate any donation that you can make so that we can keep bringing top-notch speakers like Ned to Davis. Some quick impact data for those of you who are numbers people. For our last 4 events since October 2022, about 2,500 people have either attended our in-person events, watched our virtual events, or watched a recording of our in-person and virtual events. So to keep doing what we do and reaching a lot of you, since we don't charge admission to our events, we rely on your support. If you're able to make a donation, a ballpark suggestion is $10 to $15, and we will gratefully accept any amount. Our audience donations have not rebounded yet to our pre-COVID levels, so again, if you're able to make a donation no matter what size, it would mean a lot. A couple of ways to make a donation if you're able: old school via cash or check. Please make checks payable to DSF and write DPU in the memo, and then you can pop it in the envelope you received when you checked in. Or new school via Venmo or PayPal. The program you got when you checked in has 2 QR codes. The Venmo QR code is at the top. It's the DSF Venmo, right? Please put DPU in the notes, or it's the blue QR code on your screen. Or via PayPal on DPU's website, and that's the black QR code on the screen or the second QR code in your program. Takes you to DPU's website, and there's a yellow donate tab at the top. So if you have a donation envelope or an index card with a question, DPU reps in black t-shirts will be collecting those for the next few minutes. If you're sitting in either of the side sections and you have an envelope or a question, please pass them to the center aisle. If you're sitting in the center section, you can pass them to the left or to the right. Thank you so much for whatever you can give. And please join us virtually on January 29th for our event with New York Times bestselling author Jessica Lahey. She'll be talking about both her books, The Gift of Failure and The Addiction Inoculation. So one last big thank you for joining us tonight, for your donations, and we hope to see you in January. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you, Ned, and thanks to you for all of your questions. Okay, let's dive in. And I think that one of the themes that emerged in the many questions that we received was screen time. What's your approach to screen time? Parents ask, how do you explain the importance of putting down electronics? How much do I need to minimize screen time? And how do I need to minimize screen time? And if so, how?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have, there's a chapter in What Do You Say called The Hard Ones, talking with kids about sleep and technology, because these two things are often intertwined. And the approach that we take on this is, like with most things, we really want to be consultative. If it were alcohol, if we're gambling, people can live lives and never go to Vegas and never pick up a drink, right? But the challenge is with technology, I mean, is there anyone here who does not own a cell phone? Right? And so the challenge that we have as parents is helping kids learn to regulate for themselves these wildly powerful technologies, right? And so for little I mean, from my perspective, for little kids, you know, we do everything we can, delay. We don't introduce technology. We don't have it be, you know, the electronic babysitter. When we do start introducing technology, we use it, you know, follow the American Academy of Pediatricians, where we do it in a shared way. But, you know, spending time on an iPad with us or what have you. But when we get into high school especially, we need to try to help kids learn to use these technologies for themselves. Mm-hmm. You really want to be thoughtful before you let the genie out of the bottle of what are the rules, right? What are you going to do with this? And then when you have problems, you treat this as a family system, right? You want to have meetings and talk about this. But if you feel like you are using all of your energy, anytime you're fighting your kid and having the same argument over and over and over and over, it's always toxic. It's always toxic. We go back to that relationship. So I can get into sort of nitty-gritty details on this, but we have a chapter about, you know, kids in pornography and kids in social media and kids in gaming. The first thing that I would say generally is try to be empathetic and understand. Help me understand here, like what do you get out of this most? Like, and not like why do you want to play this stupid thing? But like with video games, so you play this a lot. Why is this game more interesting than other games? Right? What makes you good at this, right? What do you have to be? What do you have to do to get really good at this game? Is this a new thing? I mean, and you be as curious as you can about this. I had this with my daughter when COVID, and just would bury herself in her room and just watch YouTube all the time, and inside I'm just sort of dying, right? Because I've written these books, and right, and like. But then I just started taking interest. So tell me, you know, who are these Norris nuts people, right? And we just started asking questions about it. And I say this because, well, there's a story in the book. We'll pick on video games. So my son had a day off from school. My son is a music major, really good musician. And he had a day off of school on Friday. So on Thursday night, I asked him, so what are you going to do with your day off of school? He's like, play Fortnite. Came through our house like a biblical plague, this Fortnite thing, right? I said, great. I said, anything else? I'll think about it. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Dying. So I come home that afternoon, and there's my kid, you know, having a whale of a good time, like killing people, whatever he's doing, right? 6 o'clock on Friday, still in his pajamas, okay? Still in his pajamas. I admit to being a little hot.
Yeah.
So I'm like, can you finish Wind Eye? I really don't care. And can you, like, get dressed? I mean, we were going to go out for pizza, right? Much more easygoing than his dad. He's like, oh yeah, sure. He finishes up. So we go off to pizza. I come down. I say nothing more. Saturday, I managed to bite my lip and say nothing. Saturday, say nothing. But at 5 o'clock, if you've got a boy, or you've ever been an ADHD boy, right, you know that 5 o'clock is the witching hour in the reservoir. Tomorrow's the thing? And he's like, ah. And he's so mad at himself. Why did I waste my whole day playing video games? I'm such a dope. I tell you, if ever there was an opportunity for like the biggest serve in the world to spike in his face a parental "I told you so," this was it on a plate, right? But I didn't do that because I'm writing this book, right? And so I muster my best empathy, and I'm like, oh, been there, done that. I know how frustrating that is. I said, can I ask you a question? Again, consulting, get buy-in. He said, sure. I said, how many hours do you think you spent playing video games? 10, inside dying, said, yeah. Great, was it fun? Oh, it was super fun. We did those skins, whatever it was. I said, one more question. In hindsight, because you sound like you're pretty frustrated now, like you wish you'd done something other than playing Fortnite, how many hours do you think you would have needed to play to kind of get your Fortnite fix? 4 or 5? Okay. Oh, last question. In the future, would it be helpful for mom or for me to try to help you manage your use of technology so you can do what you want to do but not feel like you get carried away and waste your whole day? Yeah, I think that'd be good. I just got permission to manage the technology or help manage the technology of a sophomore in high school. And I really purposely did this because my kid's ADHD. I mean, he's wildly, when he was 3, we could leave him at like, you know, the 7-Eleven with a Keno, right? And like if the clerk was kind enough to like give him Slim Jims, he'd come back and 2 weeks later be like, ooh, 11. I mean, he'd still be there, right? And so I know this is the kid that I've got, and I know these technologies are super addictive. But I also knew that he was, again, 2 years before going off to college with hoped streams and, you know, in a cashier's check, and he can do, and where I have no ability to regulate his technology. And so once kids have these technologies, from my perspective, we really, really have to work with them, not on them. I'm a huge fan, if people know Devorah, well, you guys had Devorah Heitner here before, right?
Yes.
Of Screenwise
Yes.
and Growing Up Public. I really think her approach on this is right. You know, I was talking with Abby about this. There's a book out right now called The Anxious Generation, and you know, some people act like social media is like rat poison, right? If you touch it, you're going to die. Right? And it's not. It's not. This is from Derek Thompson, who writes for The Atlantic. He says it's like alcohol. It's like a social lubricant. The things that my kids send me in the morning are just, they're hilarious, right? It's just that for like 20% of the population, it really becomes a problem. Video games really become a problem. Pornography really becomes a problem. And when it becomes a problem, we're back to the motivational interviewing, where we have to take interest and we have to get buy-in. Because if you're fighting your kids on this over and over and over and over, it doesn't work. It ends up being toxic. So delay as long as you can, but once they get to be teenagers, really try to work with them. If you get a chance to pick up what he said, we have a whole chapter on this, because the things that make this hard for you, they're hard for everyone. I mean, there were 300 psychologists sent a petition to the American Psychological Association seeking to censure, to formally criticize the psychologists who were employed by Silicon Valley tech firms in violation of their Hippocratic oath, knowing that they're making these things addictive. And they're not just addictive for teens, they're addictive for all of us. So I know people are looking for, what's the silver bullet? And just the one thing, there isn't one. There isn't one, but we want to treat this as a family systems problem, because these are hard things. These are hard things.
You've mentioned ADHD a few times now. This question asks how to motivate a tween with ADHD, the inattentive kind, who frankly has a hard time starting anything, big or small.
The biggest thing I think with kids who are ADHD is to try to get them involved in things, right? And whatever that happens to be. And teens are most often, back to technology, you know, teens don't tend to be addicted to technology, they're addicted to other teens. So you want to give them every opportunity, whether it's sports or theater, whatever they can find. Teens, by definition, when they go into adolescence, there's a drop in the available level of dopamine. So they're by design, they're bored. They're supposed to be bored because they're supposed to go out and explore the world, right? So this is why teens, especially ADHD ones, crave novelty, new situation, things that are sometimes hair-raising, because it jacks up their level of dopamine. So I give them every opportunity to do things, right? Oftentimes parents, you know, they'll take away, no more soccer for you until you get those grades up. No. Worst idea ever. Because dopamine is released in the anticipation of reward. And so just knowing that you get to have soccer practice after school can give you enough dopamine to get through social studies class or whatever happens to be. Also for kids with ADHD, activity is activating. So if I had a kid who was ADHD, I would do everything I can. I don't care what the sport is, but try them to get to be as active as they can. And lastly, sleep deprivation wildly exacerbates the effects of ADHD, wildly exacerbates the effects of anxiety. I mean, I cannot tell you how much test prep money I have been paid that I turn right around and then I use kids to can we do an experiment and literally bribe them to get I swear to God, a week of sleep when they get 8 hours of sleep, and see how much less annoying it makes your parents. No offense. Same. I mean, it makes kids less annoying. So that would be, for me, give them opportunity to do things. Video games, I'd like to see things other than video games. Lots of physical activity and lots of sleep. But also know this, that the prefrontal cortex is the slowest part of the brain to develop. The cognitive functions of it are not fully baked until age 25, plus or minus 3, kind of plus 3 for boys, minus 3 for girls. The emotional functions of it, 32. And so you look at an ADHD point, like, how is this kid ever going to get his act together? Can you remember being in 7th grade? Can you remember the boy who was like the tallest kid in 7th grade who was lording it over everyone? And you're like, enjoy it now, my friend. Because, right, he was not going to be the biggest kid when you get around to high school. And the same thing that's true for kids, especially with their ADHD. These are not issues of character. These are issues of chemistry. And these things do and can and do get better as brains develop. So try to be patient. I know they're crazy making. They are. They're adorable, but they are crazy making. But try not to give up on your kid, knowing that the brain is still trying to develop itself.
I love this question. It
Uh-oh.
says, how does a parent navigate a teenager who's in that stage where almost everything we do is irksome, or as kids today would say, is super cringe? I find that I'm either keeping my distance to avoid conflict and being verbally abused, but that's not good either. Doing things such as taking away the phone or grounding doesn't change the behavior, it tends to make it worse. This is actually really similar to another question that says, how do I handle my 17-year-old son who's angry and disrespectful when I try to talk to him? He just gets more mad.
So we're big fans of a woman named Jane Nelson who wrote Positive Discipline, and she talks about the 4 R's. So it uses for technology. So it's revealed. It's not surprise. It's not dropped on kids. It's revealed. It's related. It's respectful, and it's reasonable. Respectfully, I am constantly amused by, you were sassy. You did this. Like 140 different infractions of the parental handbook. Give me your phone. How is that related, right? How is that related? We should also keep in mind that with typically the kids who get the most punishment learn the least from it. And we really want to think about, what's the point of discipline? Are we trying to punish kids? Are we trying to make them suffer? Or are we trying to help them learn? My wife teaches Latin. The etymological root of discipline, if you go far enough back, it's actually to teach. It's not to punish. So kids who come home, Lisa DeMore, if you know her work, she talks about the emotional dumping that's just like, blah. Yes. And this is important for a lot of kids. If there's ADHD, if there's anxiety, if there's depression, if there are things that are hard, kids will hold it together as long as they possibly can at the school day, because it's scary to have a meltdown and just to be a disaster at school, because that can carry with you. I mean, you're the girl for the next 4 years who burst into tears in gym class, and so kids will hold it together during the school day, and they get literally just across the threshold, and then blam, and you're probably on the receiving end of that. So one way to reframe this is, if your kid comes home and just does the emotional dumpster dump on you, you could credibly see this as, they trust you with their hardest feelings. Doesn't feel that way. But they have enough confidence in your ability to handle all of that they save it just for you, right? Now, that being said, anxious parents don't just make kids anxious. Anxious kids make parents anxious, right? Kids are anxious because you're so emotionally attuned to them. You're going to get wound up too, especially if they go on the attack and you're thinking, give me a break. What did I do, right? My daughter and I, we can push each other's buttons like nobody's business. And it's hard. And I don't want to be that guy. And so what I would typically do is to say, Dad needs a moment. She would, if I kind of went dark and sullen, and she would get super upset. And I would say, listen, kiddo, I'm not upset with you, but I need some time just to compose myself. So I'm just going to take the dog for a walk. I'll be back. This is important. I really want to talk about this. And sort of regulate yourself, but tell your kid, I'm feeling whatever words you want to use, and then come back. For when the kid is being, everything's so cringy and like you're the worst person in the world, when you go to correct behavior, please do it. Strike when the iron is cold. Don't have conversations late at night when you've got to get yourself in bed, or when the kid has just blasted you and you are feeling really agitated, because it's almost impossible for you to convey things the way that you want. And even if you could, it's almost impossible for a kid who's in that heightened arousal to hear what you want to say. So you can say something like, all right, so that was a lot. I get that you're mad about this. We should probably talk about this, but I'm not going to talk about this now because I'm probably going to say something I don't want to say. So can we maybe revisit this later? Or you can just say, I'm taking the dog for a walk. And then the next day, it doesn't have to be in the same hour, say, listen, I was thinking about what you said, and I know you're upset, but if I'm completely honest, that didn't really sit right with me, because I know that's not the kind of person that you are, but it made me feel like you're really being salty in a way that I don't think was right and fair. Can we talk about this? And if you can do it then when the energy is lower, you're so much more likely to have, I mean, I had a client, didn't show up for appointment. I was mad. I was super, and I'd done everything right. I'd sent a calendar invite, everything. And mom's like, well, we're not paying for this. And I was just mad. I was having a day too. And then I just emailed her. I said, it must be really frustrating. She went to the wrong location. It must be pretty frustrating to go to the wrong location. And then she just went off. She said, I'm so sorry. I was, someone canceled a meeting on me early. I got a flat tire here, my kid. And she had a whole effing day. And she dropped the whole thing on me. But the only way that I got to that was say, it must be pretty frustrating when to make a mistake like this. And kids don't raise their hands and say, people were mean to me at school today, the teacher was a jerk, I'm having my period. They're not going to say that. They're just going to blast you. And so when we can be just as empathetic as we can, if you can't do it in the moment, you just come back and do it later. Are you going to get this right all the time? There's not a chance in hell. Right? The only perfect parents that I know are people who don't have children. Okay. For the rest of us, right? And so, I've thrown a lot of words at you, and I don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, I can never do this, whatever. You're going to make mistakes. And when you do, you just come back the next day and say, I was thinking about I don't really love the way that I said that to you, because I got super anxious and I felt like it was pretty disrespectful of you. And I know you're thinking, this is just as good as mine is. And when you do this, it's incredibly powerful to, again, repair that relationship. But also, if we go back to the parent consulting of making mistakes, you're modeling to them back to, when I make a mistake, here's what I do. And it makes it more likely they'll come back and do the exact same thing to you. Long answer to a simple question. But what we're really talking about is how to help kids communicate their feelings, right? And how to listen to our feelings, right? And life is messy. Children are messy.
That is such a good perspective shift, right? That if they're dumping on you, if you're like that feelings receptacle for them, it means that you're sort of their safe space. What if you have a kid who is not doing that for you and giving you one-word answers? How was your day? Fine. What's been going on? Don't want to talk about it. A lot of parents have asked, how do I get my kid to communicate with me when they're reluctant to talk or share their feelings?
Oh, that's such a good question, and so common. And the first thing I would say is mix up your questions. Really, mix up your questions. Sometimes, we'll start with this. Sometimes when we ask those questions, we're really just looking to hear fine. So you're like, well, I checked that box, right, and move on by. Get your homework done. Yep, I can go watch the game now, right? But what you might do is just be more curious and say, what was the coolest thing you did today, right? How was the lunch, right? What was the stupidest thing a teacher did today? Trust me, that'll get them going, right? No offense to the educators who are here. I was given a lecture in Chandler, Arizona. This wonderful young woman who literally created a mental health nonprofit, her senior of high school, just fantastic human. And she talked about she would come home at the end of the day, and her mom would do just that. And her feelings were all over the map. Right? On the one hand, this was great. On the other hand, this was a disaster. And it can be like, totally crappy, totally amazing. And she may not want you to may not want to share any of that. Well, on balance, fine, right? Just completely balances out. But also, she didn't feel like sharing that in that moment. She'd held it together as much as she could. And it was just like, I can't. I just can't. So fine. And from her perspective, her mom was also pretty anxious. So she was also in some ways trying to protect her mom from her hard feelings. So her mom, to her everlasting credit, turned it around and just started saying, hey, can I tell you about my day? I had this weird thing, Ned did this, and gosh, it was so annoying. Do you have any thoughts on that? And asked her daughter's advice. And started having conversations by really putting her daughter, and she's this great kid, in kind of this empowered position. And then, after mom was a little vulnerable, and this girl, she put some distance between school, then she would start to open up and share some things. Now, I know that one of the questions was, we have kids who, they don't share anything about their day. For many kids, boys especially, it's really hard to sort of sit and say, so, tell me about your thoughts. There's a story, my parents, there's a story in the book where when I was I just come out of the hospital, and we're all this stuff with therapists, right? And we're sitting there at this table with the therapist and the whole clan, my twin brother, my mom and my dad, and I'm asked some really like hard question, like what are you most upset about? And they're like 10,000 kind of like fidget toys, like, and I start picking up one of these, and I'm like, well, and I'm trying to get it out, and it's hard, it's scary to say things that are hard, particularly to a parent. You don't know how she's gonna handle it. And she's like, put that down and look at me, and tell me what you think. I said, well, you can get one or the other. I can either look at you, or I can tell you what you think, but both are not gonna happen. And so for kids who are really reserved, who are really anxious, who are depressed, who are autistic, for whom eye contact is really intense, parallel play works a lot. Start playing video games with them. So how's your week been? Blowing stuff up, right? My son and his best friends did a podcast about love while on Xbox. Yeah, the way I really feel with this is that she needs to, I'm like, oh my God, this is the worst podcast ever. But also for a lot of kids especially, if you can move them, go for a walk, take the dog for a walk, right? When feelings are hard, sometimes we really want to face to face and really read people's feelings closely. But sometimes that's just too intense. So you can throw a ball, you can play video games, you can go for a walk, and do things where it feels less intense. I mean, if you've got a kid who doesn't want to share anything with you, think of it as like trying to domesticate a feral cat. Right? You can't pick him up and put him in your lap and say, there. Oh, no. That's not how this is not how this goes. And I don't know these children, so I don't know what their experience is and why they're reluctant. But there are lots of reasons why some people, I obviously overshare like it's my job. Everybody says it is my job, right? And other people are just, they're a lot more reluctant. And so part of that also is you want to meet their energy. I'm, of course, kind of manic. But when I meet with kids who are like, it's like, you bring their energy down to their ears and say, hey, so you look like you're pretty upset about this. And last thing I'll say this, my daughter who was diagnosed at age 19 with autism, fabulous human, complicated kid to raise. And she would come home from school and she was just, she'd had a day. And I could see how upset she was. And I was always so, just making it about me, I was always so worried that I'd done something that made her mad. And I said, are you okay? And she literally wouldn't say anything. She'd shake her head. I said, was there something I did? Is there a way that I can help? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm dying here, right? And so what I'd say to her is, try to validate, listen, I can see you're really upset. And I really don't know what it is. I said, but if there's something that I can help with, will you let me know? Is it okay if, and this is the piece that I liked, I was quite pleased with how well this worked. I said, is it okay if I circle back in about 30 or 40 minutes just to check in on you? Just see if you're okay. Every time. If I said 30 minutes, she'd come down in 20. If I said 50, she'd come down in 40. And it had gone away. And by doing this respectfully, I was saying, look, I can see that you are upset. And you have reasons to be upset the way you are. And I'm not going to lower your sense of control by trying to pry it out of you and make you tell me this. But I'm here, or I'm right over there when you need me, if you need me. And that alone, I had a dad who reached out to me on TikTok about this. He said, my daughter never shares anything with me. I said, respectfully, she doesn't have to share with you in order for it to be helpful to her. For her just to know that if she needed to, that she could share with you. That alone calms those hard feelings. So I hope that helps. Kids are hard. You wish you could just, I see what's in there, but they're not built that way.
It helps so much, and we had some questions about how to get kids on the autism spectrum to open up, and I think that you just did that.
Yeah, the parallel play is a big thing. It's interesting. Part of the reason that not this isn't true of all. You meet one autistic person, you met one autistic person, but classically they talk about autistic burnout, right? So trying to understand things
emotionally, socially, on average, there's low social intuition. So it's just really, really hard. And so day-to-day life for them is just, it's kind of exhausting because rather than intuitively, oh, I can see that she's happy or unhappy, I'm trying to process all of it. And so then things that feel very emotionally intense, it's just more. And so that parallel play can be a really big thing.
So informative. The book is What Do You Say? Please give a hand to Ned for being with us tonight. Before Ned Johnson heads to the front for the book signing, I want to tell you that we are going to have Jessica Leahy on January 29th. You're a fan?
I love Jess Leahy. She's fantastic, an excellent choice. I'm sorry she's not here in person, but on Zoom, but she is. She's an incredible educator.
Wonderful. So we'll see her on January 29th. We appreciate your attendance and support. Please continue to support DPU. We're still taking envelopes and online donations via the QR codes that you saw. Please stay for the book signing if you can. Thank you so much for coming and have a great night.
Thank you.